Hey everybody. We're moving on to the second meditation, and probably the most famous part of Descartes. Write it in the fancy Latin: Cogito ergo sum, or in English, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. Or on lots of shirts that college students wear because they think it sounds clever, I drink, therefore I am. Which honestly follows just as much as I think, therefore I am. But we'll get to that in a minute. So the situation is this. He's done the argument from illusion, the argument from dreaming, and the evil demon argument in Meditation 1. And with the evil demon argument, he really thinks he has sort of the ultimate skeptical argument. What could cast more doubt on your beliefs than the idea that there's an all-powerful being intent on tricking you? And remember, he doesn't have to believe there is an evil demon. He just has to think it's possible that there's an evil demon. Because that means it's possible he's deceived about everything. Or at least that's what it seems to be at the end of Meditation 1. The beginning of Meditation 2, he says he's going to try to find one certain thing, one belief of which he can be certain. And he will use that, as he says, as an Archimedean point on which to base everything else. And so that's the goal here. And he's going to accomplish it, he thinks. He's going to accomplish it with, I think, therefore I am. Because as he points out, even if the evil demon exists and is tricking me, I have to be there to be tricked. It doesn't make sense otherwise. More broadly, if you think about what's involved in a skeptical scenario, a skeptical scenario has to appear to you exactly like the real thing. Right? The skeptical scenario has to be a situation in which your beliefs are false, in which everything you're perceiving appears normal, in which there's no way to tell that you're in that scenario, right? It has to appear normal because that's what makes it apply to the actual case you're in, right? You have to believe, in my case, that I'm sitting in my basement looking at my computer. It has to be possible for a normal situation like that to be one in which I'm deceived. Otherwise, it doesn't apply right now. I wouldn't otherwise be able to think, well, maybe this is a deception too. So the deceptions have to appear normal, they have to actually be false, and it has to be impossible to tell that you're in the middle of the deception. That's what really is going on with a skeptical scenario. But notice that in any skeptical scenario then, there's you, right? You're in every way you characterize the skeptical scenario. It has to appear normal to you. It has to be impossible for you to tell that you're in it, right? It has to cause in you beliefs that are false. You're in the skeptical scenario. There's no other way to coherently think about it, right? There's no way to coherently think about the possibility that you think you exist, but you don't. Now, he's very clear. It is possible to think that you believe you exist physically, but don't. He is open all throughout Meditation 2 to the idea that you don't have a body, or that he doesn't have a body. Right? He thinks that's something you could be deceived about. You could think you have a body, but not actually have a body. The evil demon could trick you into thinking that you have a body. But the evil demon can't trick you into thinking that you're thinking, right? Because what the evil demon can do is give you thoughts that are false, can give you beliefs that are false, can make things appear to you that are false, right? That don't reflect what's actually true about the world outside yourself. But how could the evil demon give you thoughts that are false when the thought is that you're thinking? If you're having the thoughts, then you're thinking, so they're true. The claim that I exist, I am thinking, is just sort of guaranteed to be true. There's no way to coherently imagine you ever thinking that and it being false. And that's what's meant by I think, therefore I am. Now, I say that this is what he gets to, I think, therefore I am, despite the fact that he never says I think, therefore I am in the Meditations. The Meditations on First Philosophy is by far Descartes' most famous book. And Cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am, is by far Descartes' most famous quote. But Descartes' most famous quote doesn't appear in Descartes' most famous book. It appears in another book of his, the Discourse on Method, which you can read at the same website where you find the reading, right? It's there. So he now has something he can be certain of. But it's important to be clear how much he's gotten out of this, because it's possible on reading Descartes to think that, well, all he's proven is that he exists. And he's open to the possibility that, like, he exists now but didn't exist, in the recent past. He exists now but might stop existing as soon as he stops thinking. And he's open to all these things. He thinks it's possible that he's a thinking thing that doesn't have a body, right? That maybe there's not a physical world at all. That's one of the possibilities here, that the entire physical world is an illusion cast by the evil demon. But he's actually got quite a bit more than just that he exists. He's got that all the contents of his mind really exist. And to be clear here, not the things the contents of his mind are about, but the contents of his mind themselves. So for example, my mind is full of stuff right now. Right? There's all sorts of stuff I believe in. I believe in the existence of books. I can see books lined up on both walls of my basement. I believe in soda cans. I believe in computers. I believe in the country of France. I believe in Mars, right? I believe in dark energy. I believe in all these things. Right? I believe all sorts of things are happening. So it's not just objects that I believe in. I believe that there are processes and actions and all sorts of things going on in the world. Descartes thinks any one of those things that I believe in, those could fail to be real. Could be there is no France. Could be there are no such thing as books. There's no soda cans, anything like that. But here's what can't be false. It can't be false that I'm thinking about books. It can't be false that I am thinking about soda cans. It can't be false that I'm thinking about France. The contents of your mind exist because the contents of your mind are just thoughts. And for the same reason that you can be sure you can exist, you can be sure those thoughts exist. Because as soon as you think them, they're guaranteed to exist. If you can wonder, if you can ask yourself the following question, could I be thinking about X, but it's false that I'm thinking about X? The answer is clearly no, right? Because you're thinking about X, right? In asking the question. So Descartes has not only himself, but he has all his ideas. He doesn't know if his ideas are true. Doesn't know if his ideas are accurate. Doesn't know that there's anything in the world corresponding to his ideas. But he knows at this point that, and he knows for certain, he thinks, that he exists and all his ideas exist. And it is from this foundation that Descartes is going to prove that, or try to prove, that a lot of the other stuff he used to believe in is actually true. So by the end of the book, he's going to get to the point where he is certain he has a body, where he's certain that there are other physical things in the universe, right? Where he's certain about all sorts of stuff. More certainty than most of us would be willing to allow, actually. And it's on this basis. This is what's sometimes called an egocentric basis for knowledge, right? The fundamental foundations of knowledge are you and your beliefs, your beliefs and your feelings, right? That's what you know for sure. You know for sure that you exist and that you have certain beliefs. You have certain mental processes. And everything else that you believe in ought to be based on those central fundamental facts. Descartes is, and this is the reason why Descartes is important, Descartes is really the first person to have a view of knowledge like this. Right? And that's why the doubt that he developed in Meditation 1 was important. The doubt he developed in Meditation 1 was designed to show that this sort of egocentric basis, and I don't mean egocentric as a criticism here, I just mean like a centered on the self. Not like ethically, but just like your thoughts when you're reconstructing your own knowledge are going to be centered on you. That's where you're going to start from. The doubt in Meditation 1 is necessary to get you to the point where this is clearly the only candidate for the foundations of knowledge. So while he's disagreeing with Aristotle all over the place throughout this book, he disagrees with him in Meditation 2 by rejecting Aristotle's claim that what a human being is, or what a person is a rational animal. He's like, well, that's not a good definition. For Descartes, a person is just a thinking thing. Right? That's most fundamentally what it is. while he disagrees with Aristotle all over the place, he's going to agree with Aristotle. He does agree with Aristotle that you need to have epistemological foundations. That's the way knowledge is structured. And his foundations are going to be different than Aristotle's. The foundations for Aristotle's views about epistemology, the foundations of knowledge according to Aristotle, were sense perceptions. For Descartes, they're going to be knowledge about the self, not impressions or sensations of the outside world, but knowledge you have of yourself. And this knowledge, he thinks, is infallible. And that's something we'll get back to a little bit later, because there is some reason to think that your own grasp or access to your own mental states is not quite infallible the way Descartes thinks. But that's the starting point for the project of the rest of the book. All right, I'm going to share a different way of making this plausible, right? I think at this point, a lot of you might be like, oh yeah, evil demons, woohoo, right? I'm going to try to develop a much more modern attempt to do exactly what Descartes' doing, to try to motivate his project, and then we'll cut the video off there. That won't take us all the way through the end of Meditation 2. There's a big, important section of Meditation 2 called the wax example that I'll get into in a subsequent video. All right, so I want to talk to you about Boltzmann brains. What is a Boltzmann brain? Now, you might have already heard of Boltzmann brains, but I'm going to explain a little bit of the background. So you've all probably heard of the second law of thermodynamics. Second law of thermodynamics says in a closed system, entropy will increase over time. Entropy is sometimes glossed as chaos, but that's not really a great way to put it. Whenever I hear a real physicist talk about this, what they'll say is entropy is about usable energy in a system. So over time, in a closed system, usable energy will decrease. Not actual energy, because energy is constant. Right? Energy is conserved through any interaction, but usable energy. And the way this relates to chaos is not quite clear, but like if you could think about it this way, a stick of dynamite has a whole lot of usable energy. After it explodes, no energy has been lost. Right? But there's certainly less energy to be used. The energy that was bound up in that stick of dynamite is certainly no longer available for easy use, right? And things have gotten more chaotic, right? The atoms, molecules of the dynamite have spread all over the place, as has lots of other stuff. Things have gotten really disorganized. But second law of thermodynamics, in a closed system, usable energy will decrease over time. Okay. So the way the second law of thermodynamics was originally arrived at is people were trying to build continuous motion machines. Machines that would, in some sense, take up their own, in a sense, like waste products and use them as energy. So like they would work eternally and never lose any motion, never lose any energy. They could run forever. People in the 1800s were trying to build this. And scientists would observe this and be like, this isn't working. It seems like it can't work. It seems like there's no way to come up with a perpetual motion machine. So in any closed system, there's going to be, in a sense, kind of leakage, right? You're going to have a certain amount of fuel, you put it into the system, you're never going to be able to reclaim all of it. So in that closed system, usable energy goes down. So that's the second law of thermodynamics. For a long time, the basis for the law was not very strong. It was very useful in understanding the world, but an explanation of why it was true, or the evidence that it was true, really was just that, well, it seems like it's hard to build a perpetual motion machine, and with these laws in hand, we can make sense of a lot of stuff. Then comes along Ludwig Boltzmann, a guy who came up with statistical mechanics, and he gave what was essentially a statistical proof that the second law of thermodynamics was true. And everybody was happy until they figured out, well, it also predicts, so the second law of thermodynamics says over time, usable energy will decrease. So in the future, usable energy will be lower than it is now. Unfortunately, the way Boltzmann proved that also seemed to prove that in the past, usable energy was lower, so entropy was higher. right? So if what you were trying to prove with the second law of thermodynamics is like we're here and that usable energy should be going down over time, right? It seemed to also prove that usable energy in the past had been going up. The idea basically is that there's way more ways to be a high entropy system than a low entropy system. So knowing nothing else about the future, we should expect, even if everything just happened randomly, we're going to get lower entropy or higher entropy. So less usable energy. I should draw this the opposite way. Sorry. That's confusing. I drew it in terms of usable energy instead of entropy. Right. So the idea is over time, entropy will go up because there's just more ways to be high entropy. And once you get high entropy, it's much harder to go backwards. But then the same reasoning says in the past, things should have been much more high entropy. So that's rough, right? That doesn't fit with how we think the world works. So the idea that some people had was that there would be these fluctuations, that in an incredibly high energy field, you could have a kind of fluctuation that would bring that field into a low entropy state. Okay, so we kind of actually get this. It would happen randomly, but that's how it would work. And this ended up fitting very nicely with the idea of the Big Bang eventually. So the idea is, once upon a time, there was a universe that was an incredibly high entropy state, basically no particles interacting with any other particles, so no usable energy. There's energy in each one of the particles, but because they don't interact, nothing ever happens. And then you get this entropic fluctuation, and boom, the Big Bang happens. The Big Bang happens, of course, because a bunch of particles are in one place, packed really tightly together, incredibly high amounts of usable energy, incredibly low entropy. And the thought was, well, that can happen. You can have these kinds of fluctuations. The idea here is basically that the particles, the energy involved in the Big Bang just sort of all just showed up one day, randomly. But this idea ran into a problem. A bunch of people pointed out that, like, okay, that's possible. But that's an incredibly unlikely thing to happen. It's possible, but it's unlikely. We should prefer a more likely explanation than that, right? Because that's so unlikely, we should try to find any other one. And they pointed out that the following thing is more likely than all the energy involved in the Big Bang popping into existence at once in one spot. Right? That's an incredibly low probability thing. What's more likely is just all the particles necessary to form a human brain popped in, organized as a brain. Right? Why? Well, the idea is as the number of particles goes up, the odds go down. And there's so many more particles in the universe as a whole, fundamental particles in the universe as a whole, than there are in a brain, that it's more likely to have just a brain pop into existence in the middle of empty space than it is for all the matter and energy that went into the Big Bang to pop into existence in the middle of empty space. And so, if we're going to try to explain what we observe is a very low entropy universe, right? There's all sorts of usable energy around. We are in a very orderly, organized universe. If we're trying to explain why it appears that way, one explanation is, well, all the matter and energy in the Big Bang just popped into existence, and then boom, and then over the course of billions of years, stuff sort of, settled out into galaxies and stars and stuff like that. Somebody pointed out that, well, it's much more likely that we're not in a low entropy universe. We're not in an organized universe. We're in a universe that is completely empty, high energy, or high entropy rather, and there's a brain in the middle of that space, and that brain has false memories, and that brain has false beliefs about what's going on outside of it. So the idea is, for a fleeting moment, a brain just pops into existence. And that brain thinks it's a human being with arms and legs and fingers and toes, and that it's surrounded by books and sodas and computers and France. And in another second, the vacuum is going to rip that brain apart. But this brain has all the information just like that, right? It just pop into existence with all the information that you have inside your mind right now, including all your beliefs about the past, including everything you ever think happened to you, including everything you think you're sensing right now. This is all just a fleeting moment, right? And you're about to get ripped apart. The idea is this is more likely than the Big Bang. Right? This is more likely than the Big Bang just being this random thermodynamic fluctuation. A thermodynamic fluctuation that leads to a Boltzmann brain is much more likely than that. This was brought up as a counterexample to Boltzmann's idea. Right? The thought was, yeah, congratulations, you proved the thing we wanted, which was this half of the graph. Unfortunately, you proved something we didn't want, which was this half of the graph. Your attempted explanation for how this works is much less likely than the explanation that says that, well, there's just one person in the world, and I guess it's me, and you're all figments of my imagination. Or maybe I'm a figment of your imagination. But don't worry, you're not going to be imagining very long because the vacuum's going to rip you apart. So, there's a Boltzmann brain. Right? There's the idea that you are more likely to be a Boltzmann brain than you are to be a human being in a stable, orderly universe. But Descartes would say, even then, there you are, right? If you can think, if the Boltzmann brain holds together long enough to think, you can think through the proofs he's about to give you, and actually, then he'll be able to prove to you that you're not a Boltzmann brain. And the answer is going to go through God, but we're not going to get there until after we deal with the wax example from the end of meditation 2. So there's Boltzmann brains. The idea is supposed to be this is a little bit more plausible an argument than the evil demon argument. Maybe you find it more plausible, maybe you don't, but there you go.